joining today's CaFÉ webinar. Today we have another one of our Beginner's Guide to CaFÉ series. Today I'll be giving you a full tutorial of the jury process from start to finish. The key items we'll cover today include setting up the jury scorecard options, creating and assigning juror accounts, changing the application statuses based on those scores, and notifying the artists of the jury results. Before I go over to the jury administration page, I'll take a moment to kind of set the scene for us. So in our events management page, you'll see that we have, let me pull up the call here. So you see here we have 26 entries in the received status. For the purposes of this webinar, let's just say the call deadline has passed. We are now ready to begin the jury process. You may choose to start setting up the jury and those options before your call closes and before the deadline passes, and that's completely fine. I'll show you a little bit later on the point where you can kind of get everything ready and set up and then wait until your call closes to move forward. As you can see, we have 26 entries here and received. If you were here last month, I showed you how to sort these entries between these different statuses. But the one thing that you'll need to remember for the beginning of this process for the jury side is that even if you do move some entries around, you'll want to make sure that all the entries that need to be juried are in the received status. So that's because only the entries in the received status can be seen on the jury side and therefore seen by the juror. This will come into play a little bit later on, but for now, just make sure that all entries that need to be given a score are in received. So that just sets the stage a little bit for us. We'll go ahead and dive into the jury administration side. So I'll click on Jury from the menu and click on Administration. And we'll make sure our call is selected here. You can see on the top right, we have some overview things here in this box. So we've got the call name. We have the call status, which just means that it's active in your account. We've got the number of applications. This will actually show you the number of applications total versus the number in received. So this will just show us right now the number of received, but this will show you if you have any other applications in any other status. It'll tell you the jury type that you have for your call. So whether it's scoring by art, meaning every individual image is being juried individually, or scoring by application, which means all the images from a particular artist is scored as a whole. We've got the jury status here, which we'll talk about in a minute. The jury round that it's in, starting in round 1, of course, and then the scorecard style, which I'll also talk about pretty shortly here. You can see that the jury administration page is set up into 3 main sections. We've got setup, manage, and finalize. Now, at this point in the process, whether or not your call is already closed or still open, all you have to worry about at this point is the setup tab. Later on, you'll move on to the manage tab and then the finalize tab. So it's time to start setting up the jury. So we'll start in this section, of course, the setup section. So here's where you're going to choose some of your settings and preferences for your jury. The first thing you'll want to do is just go through all of these settings and determine the best option for you and for your jurors. Under jury settings, we've got the jury status first. Your call is going to be set to not yet started when you first open it. When you're ready to start your jury, let's say because we are right now, we're going to move that to in progress. So if your call is still open and accepting applications and you're going to get everything else ready to go, you don't have to change this to in progress yet. You can leave it at not yet started. But when your call does close and you're ready to start your jury, you'll want to make sure that this gets changed to in progress. Setting it to in progress does a couple of things. First, it opens up the scorecards to the jurors. Secondly, this setting also hides the status of their applications from the artists on their end. So when it's set to in progress, they can't see whether their status is received or maybe, invited, not invited, any of those things. It basically puts the curtain up for your jury so you don't have to worry about them seeing their status. While it's in not yet started, they can see the statuses, but as soon as you put it into complete, it's started. The jury hides the statuses. And if you want to remember which one's which, we have this button here. It's this View Jury Workflow button. You can click on this, and that will just remind you what the jury statuses mean, whether or not the scorecard is open or closed during those statuses, and then whether or not the results are hidden to the applicants. So that's just a helpful reminder. All right, so we got our jury status. The next is the scoring rate. So the scoring rate is how you'd like your jurors to score the entries. You can choose between 1 through 7, which 7 being the highest, 1 through 20, with 20 being the highest, or yes, no, maybe. And I'll talk a little bit more about yes, no, maybe later on, but just so you do know, these do translate to numerical scores. So a yes is equal to a score of 3, a maybe is equal to a score of 2, and a no is equal to a score of 1. You'll want to just work with your jurors. Maybe they have a preference that they want to use, and you can choose the one that works for them. If you have multiple jurors scoring your entries, all of the scores from each juror will be averaged out into this entry's final score. So you just have to choose the overall scoring rate that works for you. We'll stick with yes, no, maybe. And then the scorecard style is next. This determines how your jurors will view and score the entries. So you also have 3 options here. First is the slideshow view. This means that the entries are displayed one after another in a slideshow, of course, and the juror clicks back and forth between them. This option also displays the entries against a gray or black background. Next is the list view. The list view displays one after another in a list, and the juror scrolls up and down between them. This view displays the artwork against a white background. And then the third option is grid view. This option displays the entries to the jurors so that they are only seeing those thumbnail images in a grid of 20 per page. They can enlarge the images and click to view the other applicant information, but the grid view allows them to more swiftly view those images and select their scores for each one in bulk. And then this option, because of how it works, it's really only available to scoring by art calls only because the images are individual entries. So to show you a little bit more about these scorecard styles, since we're not going to be getting into the juror side today, I did pull some screenshots and images of what each of these views look like. So what we're looking at here is the slideshow view. So you can see that it's against a gray background, sometimes black, and it shows the enlarged image of the artwork, and the juror can click next to view the scorecard, enter their score, and then it goes to the next in the slideshow. Then we have the list view here. So as I said, it's against a white background. The juror can click through the scorecards. Those images can be enlarged. They can view additional information, and they can just click save my score once they score, and it'll scroll down to the next in the list. So those two are pretty similar to each other. It just depends if you're clicking through them or scrolling through them. And then finally, we have the grid view. So as you can see, this is primarily just the thumbnail images of their artwork. They can click on them to enlarge them or view some additional applicant information, but it just allows them to more swiftly go through, select the scores for each with 20 per page. And that just kind of is sometimes a quicker process if you have a lot of entries. So those are what all the different scorecard options look like. We also have more screenshots and things like that in our help center that you can use to kind of review and see what might be best for your juror. We have the scorecard sort. So this lets you choose the order the applications will appear to the juror. You can choose to display them in alphabetical order by artist last name. You could do it by application ID number, or you can do it by random. If you choose it by random, you just have to then click this randomize order button, and that actually performs the randomizing. Below that, we have the blind jury process option. So if set to active, that means the artist names will be hidden from the jurors. Keep in mind, this only removes the artist names from the name field of the scorecard, but if someone happens to use their name in any artist statements or application questions, those won't be removed. So if you do need to conduct a pretty strict blind jury process, I'd suggest instructing your artists to make sure they don't include their artist name in any artist statements or any application materials. And then below that, we have the jury round. This allows you to set the jury to a new round. So of course, we're going to start in round 1. Your jurors will go in, they'll score in round 1. And then once you've sorted all of those lower scores from the first round, put them into the not invited status. If you need an additional round to further narrow down the entries, you'll change this to round 2. And then again, you can repeat the process. And if you need more, Once you're in round 2 and you've scored in round 2, round 3 will then become an option here, and so on and so forth. Right now, you're only seeing the first 2. Whenever you're in round 1 or round 2, you're not actually, removing scores from round 1, and we'll talk about this again later, but if you do use 2 rounds, those scores from the jurors will be saved separately. Moving on, we have the scorecard display section. This is where you'll select pieces of information that you want to hide from the jurors. You can hide any of these basic details of the artwork. If you don't want the jurors to see the price, the year, the description, you can click to hide that specific information. It's just important to remember here that you're hiding the info, not revealing it by clicking this. Next, the same concept here with the application questions. You can choose to hide certain things from the jurors that the artist had uploaded with their images. So their artist statement, if you activated that, or if you have custom questions, those will be listed here, and you can choose to hide that specific question from the application to the juror. So if you don't want them to know about anything, maybe it's irrelevant for their consideration, or maybe it's, information that they don't need to see, you can hide that here. Once you've gone through and selected all of your options in the Setup tab here, you'll go ahead and click Save, and that just locks in those settings. So if you go in and change things for the juror, just make sure to click that Save button. That's pretty much how you set up those initial settings here. The last thing you have to do to set up the jury before it starts is assign the jurors to the call. So for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to assume that there's no existing juror accounts created for, my particular organization here. So we'll need to create a new juror account. And there are 2 ways to do this. The first way is right here on the jury administration page. There's this jurors box. You'll go ahead and click Add Juror to add a juror account. Then you'll just fill out this information. So make sure it's left to active. Here it's autofilling with my username, but I'm just going to create a new one here. You're going to enter a password. This is just going to be the password that you'll share with your juror that they'll use to log in. And I need a capital letter there. There we go. And you'll just go ahead and fill this in for the information and make sure you give them the correct email address. The phone number here is a little less important because the email is mostly used to reset passwords or send, emails through the system. The phone number is just for reference. So you can do that. And then once you've filled in the information, go ahead and click Save. You'll see that the juror then gets added to the juror box here. So that's the one way to do it. The other way is to go to the jurors list. So to do that, you'll go to open the menu here, click on jury, and then click on jurors. This will show you a list of juror accounts that have been created for your organization. So here we do actually have some previously created, including the one I just created just now. To create a new account from this page, you'll just click on Add New, and it's the same thing. You'll just fill out this information, create a username and password that they'll use to log in, and then click Save, and they'll get added to this list here. The only other difference here is that once you create a juror account through that method, you'll then have to return to that juror's profile. So let's say I created this one, and you'll see once you've created it, you then get this option to select the calls for them to actually jury. So they have to be check marked here in order for them to see on their end which call and the entries for those calls. So if I wanted this juror here to have access to the call we're working on today, I'm going to click on this checkbox and click Save. And if I return to our main page, you'll see that they get added to the list here. So if you create the juror from this side, they'll automatically be assigned. But if you create them from this page, you'll have to just assign them as a second step. This page also lets you reassign jurors from maybe past calls, or if they've already been a juror for your organization, this allows you to assign them to that without creating a new juror account. So you don't need to create duplicate accounts if they are a common juror for you. All you have to do is find them here, click on View Juror like we did before, and assign them to the call. If they have a disabled juror account, which They could have been disabled for a couple of different reasons, but if they are disabled, or if you want to check to see if they already have an account, click on Show Disabled, and you'll see the disabled accounts here. So to assign them here, you'll just go in here and click View Juror. You'll select the call again, and this time you'll set them to active. That way their account is both active and assigned to the call. Again, I'm just going to assign one of them for this jury today. I'm going to reassign that one. Click Save. The other thing you can do here is email your jurors with the username and password information. Although we recommend not sending passwords over email, you can communicate that with them separately. But if you wanted to provide some information to them, you can click the Show Email button, and it will pull up with the form. You can select the calls that this is kind of applying to, put in your name and email address, a subject, and a message, and then click Preview Email. On the next page, click Send Email, and that will just send them an email with some of their information. You can say, hey, we're ready to go. Here's your username to log in, and they'll log in. And by the way, the jurors log in on the same page that you log in as an administrator. So that admin.call for entry. So I'll go ahead and click Save here. So that's how to add a juror to the call. So let's come back here and we'll just see, yep, we've got the jurors we want here. You'll see that I already have one kind of scored, but that's ready to go. And at this point, if your call has not yet closed, this is the point where you can kind of stop and say, okay, I've set up everything. I've created my juror accounts and I've sent them their login information and they're ready to go. So you can kind of then wait until your call closes before moving on. So at this point, it's now up to your jurors to log into CaFÉ and score the entries. Like I said, I won't be going over this process now, but we'll have a future webinar, and we also do have a webinar that shows what the process looks like on the juror side. Before we move on to the actual sorting process, I'll just show you how to view the scores that the jurors enter. So as you can see here, we have one of our jurors, and this is one way to check to see if they're scoring. So you have the scores here listed. So if they've scored all of them, it'll show the number that they've scored, and you can see that that's the same as the number of applications we have for this call. You'll see here that there's also this trash icon. This allows you to remove the scores from that juror. So it removes it from those entries, so it doesn't take into account into the sorting process, and you can remove them. Don't worry about it though, because if you wanted to remove them or if you accidentally removed them, you can easily just click this again and it'll restore those scores. But this might be handy. Maybe you set up yourself a test juror account and you've scored some things and you don't want those to be affected into the consideration. You can erase your own scores. Maybe the juror kind of mixed it up and got it wrong. They scored 1 as the highest, not the lowest. They can start over and do that by erasing those scores there. The other way to check for scores is to click on the View Scored Applications button. This will pull up a table here, which you'll see has the entries listed and the scores given to them. So you can click on that and you'll see the ID number. You can even click on the ID number to view the application from here. Under Thumbnail, you can click on the image to view it. You've got the name here. You've got the category if you have categories active for your call. Then you have average score. This is the average score given across all jurors. In this case, we only have one juror, but if you had multiple, it would be listed and then averaged out here. Under this column, you'll see those scores. This one is set up as yes, no, maybe, and any comments they left in the comment box. And if you have multiple jurors, each juror will be listed here and you'll see the scores from each one. And then under status, you'll see that they're all in the received status. That's good. That's because they're in the jury, but you can update it here if you know that, okay, we know they're not going to be not invited. But this isn't the process of changing those statuses. I'll show you that later on. This is just handy if you need to manually change one of those entries. You can sort this by any of the column headings. For example, average score, you can sort it from the lowest score first or from the highest score first to kind of scroll through and see what you have. And if you don't see any scores listed here, that just means that the juror had not yet scored that entry. So you can kind of keep track of their progress. All right, so now that our jurors have gone in and we can see that they've scored all of their entries, they've done their job, at least for this round. So we can move on to sort the entries between not invited and invited. And to do this, we'll go to the Manage tab. At the top, you can see we have two options: change status to not invited or change status to invited. Change status not invited takes lower scored entries and moves them to the not invited status. Change status to invited takes the higher scored entries or whoever's left, which we'll talk about, and put them in the invited status. So we're going to start by weeding out those lower scored entries by clicking on change status to not invited. Here, it'll list your categories, if you have them enabled, the number of applications in those categories, and then the total, of course, the average score across all entries within those categories, the minimum cutoff score, which we'll talk about, the number to be not invited, the number remaining, and then the percentage to be not invited. You'll see here that we have a few zeros, which is a little odd. So that's only because I need to select which categories I'm going to be sorting in this process. And I'm going to do it all at once. So I'm just going to click on this category heading, and you'll see we have our numbers updated. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my minimum cutoff score. This minimum cutoff score determines which entries, based on their average score, their final score, will be moved to the not invited status. Any entries below this cutoff score will be moved to not invited. Again, anything below this number. The default minimum cutoff score will be set to the average score. So right now, this is the average score across all entries within that category. So if you have a lot of entries, some people have, upwards of 1,000 entries. If you really just want to make a giant cut, you can use that average score as that minimum cutoff score to just kind of weed out those lower scores. Or you can set your own minimum cutoff score, which will allow you to control the number of entries that will become not invited. To help you determine what a good minimum cutoff score, I'll return to this previous page for a second. Come here. To help determine the cutoff score, you can download the Jurors scores. This will download as a spreadsheet, which when you then pull up the spreadsheet, you can sort it by the score and count how many entries you'd like to eliminate or keep. You can also do this by pulling up this table and sorting by average score. You can then count how many you need. And at the point where you've said, okay, that's enough, that's how many I need to get rid of everyone else, you'll look at what score that is, and then that will determine your cutoff score. So once you determine your cutoff score, you'll come here and you'll enter it in that minimum cutoff. Now, let's say, like we are here, using the yes, no, maybe scoring rate. Like I mentioned before, a yes is equal to a score of 3, a maybe is equal to a score of 2, and no is equal to a score of 1. So in this stage, let's say here that we only want to eliminate anyone who's received a no. We're going to keep the yeses and we're going to keep the maybes. In that case, since you'll want anyone below a score of maybe, and therefore below a score of 2 to be eliminated, you'll set your minimum cutoff score to 2. So I'm doing this here, and this is saying, okay, anyone below a 2, anyone who got below a maybe is going to be set to not invited. You'll see once we've entered the minimum cutoff score, the number to be invited updated automatically. So this will just kind of preview for you how many is going to be not invited and how many will be remaining. The next step is to click Show Applications. This will pull up the table of the applications and confirm for you that, yes, 11 will be moved to not invited. And you can see here that only folks with the score of no are going to be moved to not invited. So this just gives you an extra chance to confirm your work and that anyone listed has the score that you want it to be. If you see an error or if you kind of did something wrong, you can just go ahead and update that cutoff score again, and it'll update the table. You can also choose to manually override some of these status changes. So if you don't want them to move to not invited, maybe you want to move them to the wait list, or maybe it's one particular case that you want the juror to review the entry again, you want them to be considered, you can put them back into the received status. In this case, we're just going to stick with not invited. And then to finalize this change, you just have to click Change Status from whichever button you want. You'll see that it says you've successfully moved your application to the selected status. Don't worry if you kind of freak out and you think that something's gone wrong, you can always reverse this, and I'll show you where you can find these entries now. So now that they have been moved to not invited, they won't show up in this jury side. So you'll want to go to events and then management, and you'll see here that we have the entries that we just moved here in the not invited status, those 11 entries. If you need to reverse this, if you need to put everyone back and kind of redo that sorting process, maybe you kind of chose wrong numbers or something, you can click on the status, go to the bottom, and put them all back into the received status. And that will kind of revert your jury back to where you were before. So no need to worry if you make a mistake at this stage. If you recall, the artist can't see their statuses at this point, and they're not being automatically notified, so you don't have to worry about that. You can kind of mess around in here as much as you need to get to your final sorting of those entries. So we'll go back to the jury side. If you recall, we have 15 left in the received status. If I view them here, you'll see that we have 15 left here. So the next thing you'll need to do is make a decision. Are all of these entries the ones you want to invite to your event, which means you're done scoring, you're ready to finalize, these 15 are your final selections? Or do you need another round of scoring to further narrow down your final group of entries? If your answer is that you do need to conduct another round to narrow the entries down, you'll need to change your jury round to 2. So if you remember here, we've got round 1, you can change this to 2. Once I save this, I'll hide this again, you'll see that the jurors now all have a 0 scored. That's because the juror has not scored anything yet in round 2, but you can now instruct them to log back into CaFÉ and enter new scores for this smaller group of entries. The juror or jurors will enter those new scores, and you'll then repeat the process we just went through to go to manage and change those lower scores to not invited. And just so you know, the scores from round 1 and round 2 will just always be saved within their own round. So if I go back to round 1 here, you'll see that those scores pull back up again. So some jurors don't want a clean slate when they go into round 2. They'd rather see their previous scores, in which case you can leave yourself in round 1, instruct your jurors to go back in. They'll only see those 15 new, 15 applications. So they'll be able to kind of review those, and then they can actually just update their score. They don't have to enter new scores with a new clean slate. They can just override their previous scores. And some jurors like that because they want to see what they had scored them previously. Just keep in mind that if you do that kind of process where you have more of a metaphorical round 2 and you are technically in round 1 again, you're just going to only be seeing those scores of the new ones. You're not going to be able to go back and see the scores from the old ones unless you downloaded that scoring history report, which means you have them saved offline. So it's just up to you, whatever works. Let's say your answer to that previous question was, nope, I'm good. These 15 applications are the ones that I want to invite to my event. So I don't need to do a round 2. I'm just going to finalize everything in the first round. In that case, what we're going to do here, we're going to just assume everyone is going to be sent to invited, everyone left. So the next step is to go to manage and go to change status to invited. You'll see here that this page looks similar to the one before. Again, the first step is to click this category heading to make sure that they're all being included. And then here, you're going to want to pay attention to the maximum cutoff score. So as opposed to the minimum cutoff score, this number means any entry with a score above that cutoff will be moved to invited. As you can see, the default number here is 0. That's because at this stage, we are ready to move all of the entries that are left to the invited status because we've already moved everyone else to not invited. So since it's set to 0, that just means that any entry with a score above 0, therefore all of the rest of the applications, will move to invited. So you can go ahead and leave this at 0 and you don't have to change it. And you can see then that means we have 0 left in the remaining category because everyone here that is left is going to be invited. Just the same as before, we're going to click Show Applications, And we're going to confirm here that, yes, everyone on this list received a score of yes and a score of maybe, since we're going to include those. Those folks are all going to become invited. And again, if you need to move anyone manually to, wait list or something like that, you can do that here. And then we're just going to click change status. And those will then have been moved to the invited status. You can see, though, that now if we click view, it's going to say no applications found. That's okay. So don't worry if you've done those 2 steps. All of the applications don't seem to be appearing on here. That doesn't mean they're missing. That just means that they are no longer in the received status. The only exception to that is if a juror failed to score one of the entries, in which case you would still see them on here and they just wouldn't have a score associated with them. That just means the juror just forgot or just missed it or something like that, in which case, if you don't want to go through that whole process again, you can just ask them or, have them score that entry and then just manually put them into invited or not invited, depending on their score. But since no applications are found here, that's a good sign, meaning we've got everyone accounted for. And if I return to our events management page, you'll see we successfully have 11 in not invited and 15 in invited. Again, if you need to make any changes, you can click on any of these statuses and kind of move them around depending on what is actually happening behind the scenes. Now that our entries are sorted between invited and the not invited statuses, we're ready to notify everyone of the results. So keep in mind here, let's go back to the jury page. I'm going to leave my jury status in progress. This is because I'd rather make sure I send out the notifications first before I set it to complete, which therefore then publishes those statuses so that they can see them on their end. So I'm going to wait on that and just leave it as in progress while I notify them. So to notify them, I'm going to go to the Events Communication tab from the menu here. You'll see that we have the same application statuses that we have before, and it'll show the split between the invited and not invited statuses. So we always say it's best practice to notify everyone, not just the invited artists. This is because artists spend a lot of time, money, sometimes, and effort applying to your call. So it's important to notify everyone. So in this stage, we're going to be sending 1 email to the not invited folks and 1 email to the invited folks. I also want to address that if you have any artists who have multiple entries, some may be in the invited status and some might be in the not invited status. So let's say if there's one artist and one of her pieces were invited, one of her pieces were not invited, that means that artist is going to receive 2 emails, one saying, congratulations, you've been invited. Here are the pieces invited. One that's going to say not invited. I'll show you later on as well that each email will list which entries are invited and which ones are not invited. So they'll be able to decipher about it, but just know that yes, some artists will receive 2 emails if they have multiple pieces and some were invited and some were not. This of course applies to calls that are more exhibition style where you have separate artwork pieces, but if you're doing more of an RFQ or some kind of resident application, they'll just be kind of their own application as one and not separate, so they'll only receive the 1 email. So let's go ahead and just notify the invited folks first. Let's just say we'd rather send out the good news before the bad news. So I'll go back here. Once you click on invited, just click on draft email. This will pull up the email form. You'll see here, you can put in your name. You're going to want to put in your reply to email address. This means that if they respond to you, it goes to this email. So since it's a kind of a one-way email, as soon as you send this email out and the artist wants to respond, when they click reply, they're going to have your email there listed. You can also choose to CC anyone or BCC anyone. You can also choose to send yourself a copy of the first email so that you see what it looks like. Then you'll just want to enter your subject line. So we're going to say something like congratulations. And I'm going to pull some text here for our message. So you can copy and paste your message into this body here, or you can type it out. You'll want to keep this message generic because you'll be sending to a whole group of artists. The email will auto-populate the artist's username and name, as well as their entries being listed. So you'll want to just kind of keep this generic for everyone. You can also attach a small file to this email. Maybe they have some additional paperwork that they need to fill out or some extra information. You can include that here. So once you finish drafting your email, you'll click Preview. Here's where you'll see that on the preview, it says the username, it says the category they're in if you have categories. This is where it says the name of the image, so the name of the artwork itself, and the status will be listed here. So it'll say, landscape, 1, puppies, invited, or, list however many they have. And then, of course, it'll start off with their name and your email here. When you're ready, you can click to send it, which will send it all. You can save it as a draft and come back to it later, which will then just be listed on the main events communication page, or you can go back and make changes and then preview it again before sending. So another thing I'm going to point out is that you might notice this says it's a preview of the 6 emails that will be sent to the invited category. You might recall that instead of 6, we actually had 15 entries we are inviting. Even though it says 6, that just means that the system is deduplicating the emails that will be sent. So in our case here, we have 15 entries that are invited with only 6 artists with those entries. So it's going to be sending the email to the 6 artists that have those entries invited. From here, you'll go ahead and click Send. And it might take some time for going out, but it will be sent there. Once I send that message, I'm going to repeat the process and this time include the not invited email. So I'm just going to, do the same thing. This one will be the more of a thank you for applying. Unfortunately, you were not accepted. Anything else you want to include there, and you'll send that out. I'll quickly show you how to view the sent emails in case you need to do that. To view the sent emails, what you can do is go to the events management page and click on the status that you did send the email to. So we just sent the email to the invited folks, so I'm going to click on invited. Then I'm going to just pick one of these artists at random. I know it's sent to the entire batch, so all of them should be listed here, and I'm just going to click on one of them to pull up the artist application page. And if I go down to the email section here, you'll see the email that we just sent out. I can then click View, and it will show the email that was sent. So that's how you can confirm that the emails were sent and at what time. If you want to check to see if any of the emails were bounced, we do have the events communication bounce report. Here, you'll just select the call here. You'll select the date range. Okay, yep, anything sent today. We're going to click Run Report. And you'll see that no results were returned here, which just means there were no bounces reported. So that's kind of how to check on those emails that were sent. Now that we've sent our notifications, there's just one more step we need to complete for our jury process. First, I'm going to show you on the jury administration page, just so that, if you're forgetting all of these steps and you just kind of want to use the jury administration pages here, we have it kind of listed in these listing steps what you need to do. So we already did setup, we did manage. We're already in the process of our finalizing the jury results. And it'll show here what you can or need to do. And it'll say after you make your final selection, notify your artists. Okay, we did that. This just takes you to that emailer page. It just takes you back to event communication, but that's just the reminder to notify them. The next option available to us is to save the scoring history report. This just allows you to download the juror scores from any of the rounds so that you have them for your own reference. If you just want to archive those scores in your own computer just to have them, you can do that here. And then the last action item and this final step to the whole process is to go back to the Setup tab and change the jury status to complete. So this will just take me back to the Setup tab. And from here, I can click the jury status and set it to complete. Because I've already notified the artists and finalized everything. Once I set it to complete and I save the changes, that will then publicize the results on the CaFÉ page for artists. So when the artist logs in, instead of their status being received or instead of their status saying jury is in progress, it'll actually show them if their status is invited or not invited. So this is also a reminder that if any artists contact you about wanting to know which pieces were invited and which pieces were not invited, as long as you have your jury status set to complete, you can then refer them to log into their own page on CaFÉ and see their status. And then once that's all said and done, your jury status is complete, you've successfully conducted your jury and you finalize the results. The question is, can you change the scorecard style during the jury process? You can change the scorecard style at any point. The scores won't be erased or anything like that. That's if you choose this. So maybe your juror starts out in grid view and they really like that to further narrow down the selections, but then they want to see it in a different view, or maybe they just don't like one of these views. Yes, you can go in here as the administrator and update the scorecard style for them so they can kind of have a different view. The one thing that you cannot change within a specific round is the scoring rate, and that's because different numbers mean different things in each rate option. So you'll want to just make sure you stick to one scoring rate in a certain round, but maybe in a separate round, let's say you start with yes, no, maybe, but then you want to do a little bit more of a detailed scoring in round 2, you can change it in between rounds so that there's a different scoring rate in each round. Question in the chat, is the cutoff section always separated by category? Yes, it is. So you'll just want to be mindful of that. So you might have a different minimum cutoff score if you're doing it by category. If you're doing yes, no, maybe, of course, it's just going to be the same kind of concept. But if you're doing the scoring spreadsheet to determine your cutoff score within each category, they might be different scores. This concludes our webinar on the jury administration process in CaFÉ. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.